Hello, welcome to the Horticulturalists. I am Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan, and we post a video every week. So why not press subscribe and the alert button to bring you on board each week with our stories.
And every Monday, Stephen answers your burning horticultural questions. So if you've got a question for our shorts on a Monday, put it in the comments below and Stephen will answer it
as I can, one hopes. And also, when you're watching the video, remember that all of our plant names will be in the text below. So just press read more and you'll be able to find all of the botanical names in there. So don't fear if you don't hear what I've actually said when it comes to the botanicals.
Or you can't read the headings. Asterix, I'm the worst speller in the world though, so forgive any misspelling. But Stephen Ryan, there's a briskness in the air.
Yes.
What are we going to talk about today?
It's autumnal, and I figured we should talk autumn foliage. Of course, our American viewers are getting into spring, but that's fine. We're heading into our autumn, and I thought it might be an interesting exercise to look at some autumn foliage that we can see on plants at around about eye level instead of way up on great big tall trees where a lot of autumn foliage tends to be.
So it's autumn foliage with a twist.
Yes,
i.e.
slight.
You can see it at eye level.
Yeah.
We've also done a film about autumn flowering plants,
yes,
which are sort of, we call them sort of sub-shrubs, weren't we?
Yeah.
So we'll link that below. But anyway, we should press on, but I'll be ignoring behind you.
Never ignore a Japanese maple. I mean, most maples are actually trees, but of course the Japanese maple has over the years thrown all sorts of interesting forms. And this one of course is a weeping Japanese maple, and they're of course grafted onto standard. So they fit into the gamut of what I want to talk about, even though they're often classed as trees.
Because they're eye level, and we made a video about weeping maples, and your point, which is so obvious, but it astounded me, was you graft the tree at the height to which it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so when you're planting it, you've also got to take into account the depth of the pot, because that's going to reduce the overall height.
Exactly. So unless you're growing it as a tub specimen, you do have to make allowances for that height difference when it goes out into the ground.
So this tree, for example, is this going to grow much taller? And it's in, what size pot is it?
I would say in the old measurements, that's about a 14-inch bucket.
We'll show you.
Yep.
So is it, I mean, obviously the branches are going to arch.
Yeah.
Is it going to get much taller?
No, most of their growth will be in an outward and downward direction,
Yeah.
but they will build fractionally. And I have to say, if you do make the mistake of buying one that's shorter than you want it to look in the garden at home, you can actually splint a branch up with a piece of bamboo cane, hold it in that position for about 12 to 18 months or more.
Not literally hold it, but
No.
stake it.
Stake it in that position for at least 12 to 18 months,
Yep.
and they will generally stay there. And so then it will start to build a new canopy above.
Interesting.
So you can actually lift the canopy up reasonably quickly if you feel the need.
But really, it wasn't about the weeping maples. It was about other things. So they're all on the driveway. We're at Stephen's nursery, Dicksonia Rare Plants, which you will link below. So let's go and look at the things that you want to show us in the drive.
Yes, what a good idea.
Off we go. All right, Stephen, the first cab off the rank. Can I also just say, this is the driveway to your nursery.
Yes.
We have shot so many bits of episodes here. Every single month there is something going on.
And that's the plan.
But how could so much be packed? I mean, viewers, I'll take a shot of the whole length of the drive.
Yeah.
It's not that long. It's
No.
the length of a very sort of average suburban drive.
And the beds themselves are comparatively narrow on both sides,
Yeah,
so there's
maybe
not a lot of
couple
space.
feet, less than a metre on either side.
Yeah. So yes, well, it's amazing what you
Anyway,
can cram in if you're keen.
There you go. We
Yeah.
should do a piece on drive
Yes.
design. Anyway, I've hijacked.
Yes.
What are we looking at?
All right, now this shrub is just turning at the moment. It's
Yeah.
a plant called Calacappa Japonica.
Yes.
Now the Callicarpas are a small group of plants.
Japonica.
Yes, I
Japan.
know. This is Japanese. Doesn't mean it probably grows on the mainland as well. A lot of these things do. But anyhow, this one was named after it, where it was first discovered, which was in Japan. Now, Callicarpa means beauty berry, and most of them get attractive fruit on them.
Yeah.
And the common one, Giraldii, has masses of purple berries all over it, and that's its main claim to fame. But it's a rather twiggy, gawky bush. And although I love the berries, I'm not so fond of the plant.
And I've seen that plant around the traps.
Yeah, this one, Japonica, has a lovely tiered layered habit, so it's a pleasant shrub all year round. It flowers in high summer, and you get little tiny violet purple flowers on it in high summer.
Yep.
And then as the autumn comes on, the leaves turn every shade of cream to lemon, and then sort of violety purple. It's a really most peculiar autumn colour.
And I've just noticed some flowers there.
Yeah, there's a few little out of season blooms we'll have a look at.
So this is probably 7 to 8 feet.
Yeah,
which
so
is
2
what?
and a bit metres.
Yeah.
So
Is that its resting height?
more or less. So it's not going to get a great deal bigger. What it's actually done over the last few years, in fact, is, like we all do, gone sideways.
It's spread.
Yes,
Stephen.
it's spread sideways a little bit more. So it's, and I hope all these shrubs will actually illustrate the same thing. It does things at other times. It's not just about its autumnal foliage.
So you've got spring flowers.
No, summer flowers.
Summer flowers.
It does throw the occasional autumn berry, but I think this particular species needs a cross-pollinator to berry properly, so I don't ever get particularly good crops of berries, but it does make up for it in other ways.
So really then, it's about the autumn foliage.
Yeah, mainly the autumn foliage and the nice form. I think it's a very pleasant shrub. It's got that sort of slightly tiered, layered look, that sort of tabulated look, without being too obvious.
So, I mean, this is a good example, actually. So this is not a large space. There is so much going on here. Every season, every film, we found something to talk about. So it just indicates how you can think about using things. So you get at least sort of 2 activities, whether it's flowers, spring foliage, autumn flowers, or winter form.
Yes, it's got to have something else going for it, because autumn foliage, as important as it is,
Not enough.
It is generally not enough, because a lot of things will shed quite quickly. So you're going to have this glorious massive autumn colour, but you'll only have it then for perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, and then
what?
bare sticks.
Yep.
So you need to have other things in the mix.
All right, basic care then. Sun, water, temperature.
All right, it's cold hardy. I mean, I'm sure you can grow this in Canada. So it's very cold hardy. It wouldn't grow well in the tropics. It won't like that humidity, but a temperate to cold climate should suit it fine. It doesn't seem to be particularly fussy about soil types. I've got an acid soil here, but I'm sure it would probably cope quite well in an alkaline one. And it colours best where it's in the sun, and it also, in fact, grows bushier if it's in a fairly sunny aspect. So this one actually catches the sun from mid-morning through till quite late in the afternoon. This driveway runs directly east-west, so it catches the sun as it goes all the way across, and I just went in the wrong direction all the way across. So there you go. So it gets plenty of sun. In this climate, I rarely water it, so it seems to be reasonably drought tolerant. It's been through millennial drought and goodness knows what else with very minimal care and attention. So reasonably drought hardy as well.
Excellent. Okay, well, we just need to move along the drive a bit.
Yeah, just a couple of feet, and we'll have a look at the next one.
Let's go.
All right, Matthew, here we are in front of another couple of candidates for our footage for this week's video, and they're growing together, which is something we should mention as well.
It is, because I must say, the contrast of these scarlet leaves and the golden leaves, amazing.
Yeah, and it's exactly what I expect from autumn. I want colour, and I want it to do its thing in abundance, because we're going into the cool of winter and there'll be lots of bare sticks. So I'd like to go out in autumn with a bit of a blast.
All right, so talk to me about these. This, to me, looks familiar. What is it?
Well, it's a ginkgo.
Yes, not an eye-level shrubby thing, Stephen.
Well, it will eventually reach eye level, but I'm happy to have eye level and below.
My point is, though, that ginkgos are trees.
Yeah, but this one's not. It's really interesting, because everybody knows that the ginkgo is, I hate the term living fossil, but anyhow, it seems to be what people coin. You know, it's an oxymoron. You can't have a fossil that's alive. But anyhow, it is a very ancient tree. It's the last of its group. Only one species exists. But since it was first discovered in the late 1700s, it's been raised from seed again and again and again, and it has thrown a number of interesting variants from seed. And this is one of the dwarf variants discovered in Germany called Mariken. And Mariken, this one's been grafted onto a metre tall standard. If you don't graft it, it'll eventually get up to about the height my plant is, but that's about it. On the standard, it is going to eventually end up at least eye level. So you'll end up with, well, about a metre each way on the plant.
So that would also make a great tub specimen.
Absolutely fabulous tub specimen, great as a centrepiece for a rock garden. Of course, the shape of the leaves is what ginkgos are all about, but even in the winter when it's bare, it's got this really stiff, interesting, slightly gawky sort of branches, but there's something quite architectural about the plant when it's bare.
Now, we've mentioned ginkgos before, and I can't remember in what context. So we did talk about the stinky berries, which smell like vomit, from my New York days in Brooklyn, when the streets are lined with ginkgos, and it's like walking on a path of vomit. Is it the boy or the girl that has the berries that stink?
It's the girl, and you don't want to plant girl ones.
You only want boy ones. Same with the dwarf.
It is only a dwarf cultivar. All of the cultivars that have been raised are being sold around the trade, to my knowledge, except one called Queen of Fruits, which is grown because it has huge big berries on it.
Which smell even more like vomit. Anyway.
Probably, but nonetheless, you can eat the kernels, and some people want to grow it as a crop. So if you want to eat the berries, then buy Queen of Fruits. All of the other grafted ones, the pencil ones, which is in one of our other videos, the dwarf ones like this one, and there's a moderately small one called Saratoga. They're all male selections, fortunately.
Right.
So you're not going to get the stinky berries.
Okay, now another question. This one is in dappled light. Now, I would have assumed a ginkgo was a full sunlight kind of guy.
Well, it is basically, but it will cope with both. They're a very adaptable group of trees. I mean, if you can grow as a street tree in New York, admittedly, they wouldn't be planting the dwarf version, but the normal one, with air pollution, cold, heat, all the things, no space for the roots to go out. If they can cope with that, they can cope with almost anything. So ginkgos are, well, they've been around an awful long time, so they've adapted quite nicely, and they cope with conditions. Again, apart from the tropics, they'd be fine almost in most people's gardens. And certainly some of the dwarf cultivars, and Mariken's not the only one, are well worth looking out for. I love them. Exactly.
Okay, so what is the scarlet leaf thing? That has the most amazing leaves.
Yeah, now this is a North American shrub. There's only 2 species, and it's in a genus that I rather love the name of. It's called Fothergilla.
Not named after...
Well, it's named after a Mr. Fothergill.
Mr. Fothergill.
Yeah, funnily enough.
Nearly always a Mr.
Yes, it always seemed to be, dead white guys. But yes, so Fothergilla, there's 2 species. This one is gardenii, so Fothergilla gardenii, I assume named after somebody whose surname was Garden. The other one is Fothergilla major. I think they missed a chance. They could have called this minor, but anyhow, they didn't. And the only difference really between them as garden plants is that major has quite large leaves. Gardenii has comparatively small leaves, so it's a smaller leafed one of the 2. There is a hybrid between the 2 called Mount Airy, which is out and about in the trade and well worth looking for. But the thing I like about Fothergilla, apart from the fact that it's a moderately small shrub with fantastic autumn foliage, but it also gets these beautiful white fluffy flowers on it in the spring.
Okay, because I was going to say, everything has to do at least 2 things. So the other things are flowers.
Yes, and the Fothergilla makes a slightly suckery shrub. It will grow in Canada, it'll grow in Scotland, it'll grow in, pretty well all of the coldest climates where our keen gardeners come from, and make a fantastic shrub, and normally goes red, but if you put Fothergillas back into too much shade, then they'll go a bright golden yellow before they shed, so they don't keep the red if it's in the shade. So there you go. So Fothergilla gardenii with Ginkgo biloba Mariken, making a nice little autumnal combination.
A very beautiful contrast. You just alluded to this, sunshade. So in the shade, its colour will change, but what does it prefer?
Well, it doesn't like to be in Australia, or certainly you wouldn't put it right out in the full sun where it's going to get the hot afternoon sun. It comes from North America. It's used to being in a slightly cooler climate.
Is it an understory shrub?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, and here it grows really well. It's actually borderline in Melbourne because the climate is just that little bit too warm, and you don't get the winter chills that it seems to like. So it's better in the hill country, so here around Mount Macedon, or if you took it up to the Dandenongs or some of those other areas where the altitude's sort of getting up to 1,000 metres, then it's a great garden plant. But I probably don't normally suggest you try it in Melbourne, but then I'd like people to try the unexpected as well, of course.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to shuffle off to the left for another plant.
Yes, what a good idea.
Another maple. Now, we have actually filmed this maple before in our maple epic, which I will link.
Yes. Now, I wanted to re-engage with the maples. We've discussed what they do and where you'd grow them and how you'd use them and so forth. But I just wanted to slot this one in because it does something that's a bit different in the weeping maples. It's one of the burgundy leafed ones in the summer, and as you can see, it goes lovely tomatoey reds in the autumn before it sheds.
Yeah.
But it's a variety called Hana matoi that was selected in Japan, obviously, with that name. And during the summer months, it also has pink variegation through the burgundy foliage.
So I think we've actually covered this in both our variegation film
Yeah.
and our maple films.
Very
So you can
likely.
see it. But we never shot it in its autumn colour.
Yeah, so
and
there we go.
It's completely different.
Yeah, it does. It changes completely. So I think it's a particularly pretty little tree. And I do love the weeping maples because they grow into wonderful old age. They get gnarly and they grow through themselves.
As do we all.
Yeah, yes, gnarliness is something that happens with age.
Once again, though, I am quite surprised at just how sheltered this one is. It's under the canopy of another maple.
Yes, it's actually, it hasn't turned yet, but it's the only upright form of these dissected maples, one called Seiryu. And in about a week or two, this will have dropped. Seiryu will start colouring and it will go the most fabulous bright scarlety tomatoey red. So by having different plants that will colour at slightly different times, I can also extend my season.
And extend your driveway. Honestly, this is the driveway that just keeps on giving. And
Yes.
it's going to give us something else.
just up here. So let's go.
And the end of the drive.
Yes, I'll apologise for any traffic noises as we're going on here. We're virtually on the road now. This is one of my all-time favourite autumnal plants. It's a Rhus, R-H-U-S, or Rhus, depending on what school you went to. And this one is Rhus Tiphina Dissecta. So it's a cut leaf version of the sumac, the horned sumac from North America. And it pays its way, and it's just as well because it suckers as well, so it takes up a fair bit of space. So I guess this one needs to go out with a health warning because it will take off across your garden, but it's very manageable. I'll show you some of the suckers shortly, but it really does pay its way.
Dig them up and sell them to people. So.
I do. In fact, I always say to people, I can dig up the suckers and sell them to other suckers. Sorry.
The wheels of commerce.
Yes, exactly. But this does pay its way in lots and lots of ways.
Tell us.
All right. It has a pleasant shape, so you get this lovely dome-shaped large shrub.
It is very beautiful.
Yeah, it can produce a small tree, so we are pushing the barriers a little bit here about our size parameters that we're talking about.
But, and we are making a film about your warm border, and what you do is actually just cut it down every year.
Although that's a slightly different species, but yes, I do in fact cut the Rhus down. Now, some people in Australia are scared of them because there is one species that people were allergic to. This isn't it, and the one that they were allergic to is now in its own genus, fabulously called Toxicodendron.
That sounds like a Britney Spears hit.
Yeah, well, it does almost. So the Rhus are perfectly safe, and in fact you can take these burgundy heads off, soak them in water and produce a very good thirst-quenching acidy drink.
Really?
Yeah.
They are. So, firstly then, we've got autumn foliage, we've got the great form, we've got these, so these are the seed heads, aren't they?
Well, they're more or less like that as a flower, but they're now at the point where they're probably starting to set seed. So you get these burgundy cones that sit on the tree, and they stay on the tree all winter. So when it's bare, you've still got these fabulous burgundy cones on this sort of stiff, almost candelabry-like tree. And so it certainly pays its way in the garden, but it's not for the meek and timid gardener because it has a great zest for life.
You don't know meek and timid gardeners. So where's it from? North American?
It's North American. The Rhus genus is very large, and there's evergreen ones, deciduous ones. There's some from Africa. There's some from Madagascar. They're from all over the world. But the staghorn sumac, which this one is, Tiphina, is a North American plant. I think it grows up into Canada, all through the colder parts of North America.
So obviously cold tolerant. What about in Melbourne? So a more Mediterranean climate?
It should be fine in Melbourne. So whether it'll colour quite as well in Melbourne as I can get here, because I get this fabulous sort of bright orangey colour through it, which I adore.
So that's what we've not talked about. Is the colouring in relation to A, light, and B, temperature?
Yes.
So if you're in a warmer but still wintry climate, like Melbourne, so down the hill, you won't get as much colour?
You don't tend to get the quite the intensity of colour.
Right.
So things will often still colour all right, but you won't get that real intensity of colour. And of course, the more warmer climate you get to, the worse it becomes. So obviously in far north Queensland, you're not going to get autumn colour.
And there's no need because it serves no evolutionary purpose. And then the other thing then is light. So if something is in full light, and it's meant to be, it's going to colour well.
Oh, yes.
If it's too shaded, it won't.
Yes, yeah. So in most cases, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but in most cases, anything you're growing for autumn colour needs to have a fairly high light level to colour up well.
And so, sub-question, and I think we may have covered a few things that do this. Are there any shady things that have great autumn colour?
There are, but they're few and far between. And one I have to say that I would always recommend to people, but unfortunately it's not a shrub, is the climber, Parthenocissus henriana, the silver vein creeper from China.
Which we have also made a film about.
We have indeed. That will colour superbly in the shade and looks fabulous.
And you know what? Although it's not a shrub and it's not really part of this film, we're going to go and look at one other thing in the nursery and we'll just show you that because the leaves are like a child's painting of bright scarlet. I've never seen such colour.
Yeah, as a bus goes past.
Oh well, there's lots of people come to Mount Macedon to see the autumn foliage.
And
anyway,
just to finish off, above my head, you can just see some autumn colour coming on a dogwood. So there's a Cornus Florida just behind me.
You know what? Let's be really cunning. Look at that.
Oh, look at that. Oh, there we go. And again,
Magic of television.
The juxtaposition of different colours and different leaf shapes, which gives the autumn its zing, I think.
It's a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
When planning a garden. Oh my goodness, I do find that a bit stressful. Like, am I doing the right thing? Have I got enough layers, transitions, contrasts?
Just remember it's a journey. So you'll make mistakes and you can adjust them.
Right.
You don't need to get it right at the first attempt. It's nice if you eventually get something you're happy with. It's not so much getting it right, it's what you're happy with that matters.
Let's actually then talk about this drive. Actually, let's swing the camera this way.
Oh, here we go. All right, I'll come around as well.
So here's the drive.
Yes.
So when did you plant the driveway?
All right.
And you can see there's all sorts of things going on there.
Well, I've even got a Viburnum in fruit above my head, Viburnum opulus. All right, the driveway was planted about 1985, 86, after the dreadful fires we had up here in 83. And it's had a couple of reinventions as I've gone along. I started out originally doing the driveway as a very formal entrance, and I had narrow pencilly conifers and I did it all green. I got bored with it in no time flat, and so I started hoiking things out and replanting. So the driveway has evolved over the last 15, 20 years to something that I'm now fairly happy with, but it may well have another incarnation as we go along. Some things will go, some things will stay.
And you're still adding things to it? And
oh yeah, there's always a space. You can cram something else in if you're very clever.
So there you go. You don't need to worry about getting it right with all your layers and contrasts in the first year.
No, it's an adventure.
Well, let's go further into the nursery and just show you those two other things.
All right, what a good idea.
Stephen, you can't resist a cornice.
No, I can't.
It's got to be slid into every film.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I'm terribly sorry, and we're doing it yet again. This, although it's a large shrub...
I was going to say, that is 3 times my height.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it is shrubby, and it's suckering, so it's made a thicket of stems. And it's a cornice called Cornus Dramandii, which is not often grown commercially, certainly not in Australia. It's used for re-vegging in North America, where it comes from, and it grows really well in wet to soggy soils, and it loves the sun. It's very cold hardy. It's a good habitat plant. It will also bind banks and do all sorts of things like that. It has quite attractive little white flowers in clusters in summer. Apparently in North America the seeds are popular with certain bird species as well, so they'll eat the little white berries. But the thing I like about Cornus Dramandii, which is commonly known as the rough dogwood because its leaves have a slightly rough texture to them, is that it starts colouring...
Not really, right?
Yeah, anyhow, well, compared to others. The thing I love about it is that it starts colouring almost before anything else has started, and it's still got coloured foliage on it when the high season happens in the autumn. So this has actually had red leaves on it now for probably a month and a half, 2 months.
Really?
And it's still got oodles on it. It'll hold its foliage yet for another probably 4 weeks or more. So of all of the autumnal colouring plants I grow, this one extends the season more than anything else I have in my collection.
Interesting.
So it's not probably, to some people's ways of thinking, a front-ranking shrub or small tree, but just for the fact that it holds its autumn colour for so incredibly long in my garden, I think it pays its way, and I think it's quite an attractive plant. But again, it's suckering, so you need to take that into consideration if you're going to plant it. Yeah, until it starts to flower in the summer, and sometimes it's still in flower when the first of the red leaves start to form in it. It is really more about its autumn effect, but it's such a long period.
Well, two things then. Well, obviously you've got to give it space so it can form a thicket. But then the thicket creates its own microclimate, doesn't it, in terms of dappled shade and a woodland. Yeah. So actually, it can be quite an all-encompassing layered moment.
It could be. In the right aspects, in the right garden.
In the right hands.
In the right hands. You could end up using it like a little thicket or copse of small trees, and then you could underplant it with all sorts of attractive woodland plants.
But what have you got in front of it?
Yeah. Well, I've actually got a stripy grass. It's variegation. This is Miscanthus sinensis variegata, funnily enough, or Variegatus probably. And I think it works seriously well with the Cornus.
So there's a bit of a sub-theme here about the contrast of colours, either whether it's with autumn foliage or with something else. So much as I dislike variegation, it actually, in this form, this is actually quite handsome. Yeah. But it contrasts beautifully with these rich reds.
And hopefully the red leaves will still be on it when the Miscanthus goes into dormancy, when it'll go all straw coloured.
Right.
So it can keep the show going for quite a while.
Many things. Well, we're going to go and look at the next.
All right. What a good idea. I know everybody's going to ask. It's got nothing to do with the story other than it's got lovely autumn foliage on it. This is Malus tschonoskii, and we have done a video on fastigiate trees. So there you go. Now, Matthew, a group of plants that we'll probably have to do a full video on at some stage or another. One that does fit our particular brief for this story are the Viburnums. And this particular one not only has fantastic autumn colour, you get the lovely burgundies and pinks and yellows and things on it, but it also does lots of other stuff. Now, it's one called Viburnum sargentii Onondaga. It's an American viburnum, and it does, in order of appearance, in the early spring it comes out with white lace cap flowers, and the fertile flowers in the middle are a deepish pink colour. So you've got a bicolour flower. The new growth comes out sort of a chocolatey colour.
So it flowers on bare stems?
Yeah, it's starting to get its leaves when it comes into flower. So it's just at the beginning of spring. So you get the flowers, which are pink and white. The new growth, which is chocolatey. Then in late summer, it can also produce rather handsome red berries. And then in the autumn, you get this fabulous autumnal colour as well.
Oh my goodness, a quadruple or a whatever 5 is the threat.
Yes, exactly. So some of the viburnums are really top-ranking garden plants. They're generally fairly hardy. They're not completely heat tolerant, so in Australia that can be an issue if we get the 45 degrees. But otherwise, a reasonably hardy group of shrubs. This one would grow up to around about the 2.5–3 metre mark. They're very prunable. And yes, you've got spring flowers, you've got summer berries, you've got autumn foliage. What, in fact, more could you want?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know.
Well, you'd be greedy if you wanted more, I have to say.
So as we were wandering around the nursery, just planning out this video, tree peonies. And let's talk about their autumn foliage.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. People always get terribly excited about tree peonies in the spring, of course, when they have their big sumptuous flowers on them. But many of them actually have quite respectable autumn foliage as well. So they sort of fit into the gamut of lower growing, good autumn foliage, even though it's not a plant that people would immediately think of.
And are some more autumn foliagey than others?
Yes, and therein is the issue. Just buy them when they're in their autumn foliage, and maybe you'll end up with a rather handsome one that still has nice flowers anyway.
There you go.
But it's just one of those asides that people don't think about.
Okay, and then we did mention one last thing, which we've got to go and find, which is that creeper.
Oh, yes.
Which is the shade-loving autumn foliage.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, let's do that.
Let's find that.
Well, Matthew, you might wonder why we're standing here with greenery all around us when we've been speaking about autumnal foliage.
I'm not seeing any autumn colour. I mean, this is
the wisteria is
which
just
we're not
yellowing.
talking about.
Yeah, but the climber behind us is the one that we alluded to earlier, Parthenocissus henriana, the silver vein creeper from China.
Which we have included in our unusual climber creeper video, which we'll link.
Yes, so yes, go in and have a look at that. It'll explain a little bit more. But it's one of the few autumnal foliage plants
Yeah.
that will in fact colour well in the shade.
Yes.
And if it's growing in the shade, it produces, I'll pluck a leaf here, it produces these sort of silvery veins down the centre of the leaf, which
Yep.
you can see there.
Yeah.
If it's growing in the shade, those silver veins stay silver, and then the leaves turn bright scarlet.
Just look at that red.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So will this whole plant turn that
Yeah,
colour?
it will, but because the small plant I'm showing you was growing out in the sun, it doesn't have the white veins, so it's gone bright scarlet.
Right.
This plant in the shade here, though, because this is sort of facing south in the southern hemisphere,
right.
will go red and white, which is quite dramatic.
Wow.
So very worthwhile plant, but it's nor is it a shrub or any of the things that we're supposedly talking about today, but we couldn't help ourselves.
Because it colours in the shade, and I saw this again in the nursery and said, look at that colour. Anyway, well, Stephen, that has been an epic of autumn chest height colour.
And we haven't mentioned the fact, of course, that most of you in America would be calling it fall.
You will. And in fact, you won't because it's spring. But anyway,
Yeah.
Our friends in the Northern Hemisphere have much to enjoy.
Yes.
As we are hunkering down for the colder seasons. Anyway, this has been wonderful. Again, so many interesting things, Stephen. Thank you.
Some fabulous plants, and they've all found a home in my garden, and I think they're well worth finding a home in yours.
And in your drive, let's not forget that. Maybe we need to do a whole story about your drive.
We could do a drive-through.
Because every season it's got something going on. Anyway, viewers, if you want to know what we're doing next week, hit subscribe and find out what we're doing. We post every Friday.
Don't forget to send me a question in the comments section below. If you've got something you need to know about, I'll do my best to answer it for you.
There you go. So until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.